2 minutes. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you're at. Welcome to today's webinar, Best Practices for Communicating and Using Safe Routes to School Data. My name is Michelle Lieberman. I'm the Technical Assistance Manager at the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. A little bit about our organization in case you're not familiar with us. We're a national nonprofit that's advancing safe routes to school by safe walking and bicycling to and from schools, improving the health and well-being of kids of all races, income levels, and abilities, and fostering the creation of healthy communities for everyone. A few housekeeping items in GoToWebinar. On the left, you'll see the GoToWebinar viewer where you'll see today's presentation. To the right is the control panel where you can raise your hand, ask questions, and select your audio mode. Please note that the control panel will automatically collapse if you don't have it in use. So if you want to keep it open at all times, click the View menu and uncheck Auto Hide Control Panel. There are two ways to listen to us today, either through your telephone or through your mic and speakers. If you're having problems with one of the options, I would encourage you to try the other one. If you're still having difficulties, send us a chat message and we'll try to do our best to field those issues. Everyone is on mute today, but we definitely want to get your input. You can use the question box to ask the speaker questions for the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar, but you can type those questions in at any time, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can. We have a really great lineup of speakers today. Today we're going to start with Sherry Moore. Sherry is a native of Las Vegas and the former Safe Routes to School coordinator at the Clark County School District in Nevada. She graduated from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas with a bachelor's of landscape architecture and has worked as a non-motorized transportation planner and designer. Sherry recently retired from the school district and is currently traveling and exploring the country with her husband in an RV. Sherry's going to talk about how Clark County School District maximized the use and effectiveness of their data for not only the school district but their partners by asking the right questions at the very beginning. After Sherry, we'll hear from Hannah DeCapelle. Hannah is a senior planning associate at Alta Planning and Design, where she leads the firm's National Safe Routes to School program and practice. She has 10 years of experience planning inclusive and equitable safe routes to school programs across the country. Hannah is going to talk about regional safe routes to school program evaluation, specifically focusing on an example in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then after Hannah, we'll hear from Seth Lajeunesse. Seth is the Associate Director of the National Center for Safe Routes to School and a research associate at the University of North Carolina's Highway Safety Research Center. He studies trends related to walking and cycling, social and political dynamics of road safety initiatives, and evaluations of walking and cycling programs. Seth is going to talk about the statewide evaluation process in the state of North Carolina. So, to kick it off, let's turn it over to Hannah, or to Sherry, sorry.
All right, my name is Sherry Moore, and as she mentioned, I'm the former Safe Routes to School coordinator for the Clark County School District. And today I'm really going to talk a lot about the conditions that you should think about before you start collecting data and of designing your evaluation program. So I'll just do one slide real quick over a little bit about the Clark County School District so you have some context for that. And then talking about beginning with the end in mind. Asking those questions up front and really taking stock in your program. And then having you start thinking about what is your data and evaluation capacity? What can you really do with your existing resources, and maybe you need to get more resources. The school partner, and a lot of times when we have our own programs, we forget about what the school is required to do and how we can best help them. Tailoring the Safe Routes to School program to match your evaluation and data can be very, very helpful, and to be thinking about all of that again with the end in mind. And then I'm going to give some example of how to use data and then some of our sample reports. So Clark County School District is the 5th largest in the U.S. As of this coming up year, there'll be 6 new elementary schools added to the 271 that we already have, and then 6 more will be coming on next year. It's a regional school district because we have 5 cities and 1 county, and the county acts like a city government in many instances. Right now, as of last Thursday, there was 113 schools in the Safe Routes to School program. We had 3 full-time staff and 1 part-time staff. And just geographically, so you can understand the size of Clark County, it is the size of the state, roughly the size of the state of New Jersey. So really thinking about beginning with the end in mind. What is it you're really going for? And these are some questions that I'm hoping will spur you to think about how your data structure, what you evaluate, but what are you required to evaluate and report on? What are those things that are non-negotiable? And then hopefully you have partners and other people that are asking you for data. So, are you thinking about when you're making those lists of what people are asking for, what are they asking you for? Are improvements in funding directly connected to certain data pieces? What do you want to evaluate, and does your data collection support your evaluation program, or are they disconnected? And then are you collecting information that you're not using or is not needed? And do you already have thinking about a baseline? Do you have a baseline for that starting place for your data, or do you need to establish one, and that should be part of your evaluation strategy? So I just wanted to give you a really an idea of, in CCSD, the Safe Routes to School program is housed in the School Community Partnership Office, where partnerships are the thing that we're evaluated on. So partners is important. Everything is about partners, and our growth and our success is measured by how many partners we have, how we grow our partners, donations of time, cash, material goods, and how many students and schools are impacted. So this really this is something that's non-negotiable. So this is one of the things we had to consider right up front. We have to report on these things. And then we get our funding NDOT through our local regional transportation commission, and they don't really ask us for a lot of numbers, but they do ask us for participation numbers, and then they like a general accounting of our activities. We have a lot of requests from different folks. For example, the Nevada State Highway Safety Plan, the pedestrian critical emphasis area, kind of like a big, long title, but they're really important about guiding a lot of what goes on in the state of Nevada. And one of the things that they did not have is how many students are receiving bicycle and pedestrian education. How many schools that are involved in the Safe Routes to School program. The cities and counties ask us for that all the time, and then our 2 of our cities and our counties just recently in the last 2 years applied for bicycle-friendly city and county status. So that's something that they want to know. Bike and ped counts. Some of the cities and the county for sure want to know, hey, what's going on at these intersections or these places where you want improvements? What are the numbers there? And then how many kids walk or bike to school? We get city and county requests for those. What are some of the other things we get requests for? Walk audits. Walk audits are one of the most popular things that the schools want done. We've had 50 of them done originally through the CDC's Communities Putting Prevention to Work grant. And then more recently, we had another 15 funded through the Regional Transportation Commission's Unified Planning Work Program. And then the follow-ups to the walk audits after they're done, what has been done or not has been done. And we get a lot of requests for, how many of those things that were recommended were actually done. Program evaluations, and of course the parent surveys and the student tallies are always points of interest. So the data and evaluation summaries, I kind of put them together in some boxes here. Required is not really that big of a box, and then we desired, we'd like to do a better job on the parent surveys and the student tallies. And then the requested ones are the ones over in the other box. And so one of the things we look about is what can we do with these things? What can we, with our staff and our time, what can we actually do? So thinking about that, we talked about what can we collect with our current manpower and what can be analyzed with our current manpower. Because sometimes we can collect a lot of information, but we never get around to analyzing it. And then what kind of data do partners and others collect and analyze? And we found that a number of our partners already are collecting that data that we can have them share with us. And then what is a realistic timeline to implement the collection and analysis of that? And then not to forget what is helpful for the schools, because the schools have to have certain goals that they have to reach. How can we help them? So I want back to the school. The schools are our partner, and we obviously there's 4 bullet points here that I think you might all know. But the 4th bullet point under how does Safe Routes to School help a school meet the goals is community partners. The schools in the Clark County School District are required to have community partners, and so we're able to help them match them up with community partners. And then one of the things that schools always ask is, what does it mean to be in your program? Because, hey, we did, Walk to School Day 2 years ago. We're in your program. And so we found that we didn't have a solid answer what it meant to be in the Safe Routes to School program. And then we have to make it easy for the schools to participate, or that they want to, but if they have so much on their plate, if we can't make it easy for them, then it's hard to get them to participate. So back reviewing that, those summarized points, I want you to just take a real quick look at these 3 boxes. And then this is what we've done, looking at evaluating them with prioritizing with existing resources. So on the left-hand side, this is what we can do with our existing resources. We can track partnerships, the number of schools and students participating in events, the number of schools in our program, and we can do some limited bike and pedestrian counts and limited documentation of bike parking spaces. And that was a question that results out of the Bicycle Friendly City application. And then with additional resources, you can see these are all the things that we could do if we had more resources, manpower, additional help, additional funding. So one of the things that grew out of this to know what it meant to be in the Safe Routes to School program was the achievement level program. And we took a look at what Vermont and what South Carolina did before we developed our program. But this sheet right here is what we use to collect data from the school. And it also helps them build to meet their goals. And we had a number of our partners, community partners, including the Health District, the Regional Transportation Commission, planning, traffic engineers, all of those helped provided input to make this program work. So this is kind of it's our own take on what Vermont and South Carolina had done. So this is what it means to be in the program. We can give the school a sheet and they go, hey, our minimum goal for all the schools is that very first step is to hold 1 bicycle and pedestrian safety education activity each year. And then real quickly, this is the form that we sent out. This is how they sign up to be in our program, and this is how we know how many schools in our program. And I think the most important thing on this sheet for us is who is the point of contact at the school, and the principal has to sign off on it. And because we had instances where somebody wanted to do it and they didn't coordinate with the principal. So now we're ensured that the principal knows about it, they've assigned a champion at the school, and we've got some basic information about each of the schools. So some of the other program adjustments that came out of our looking at our data, what data we collected and what evaluation program that we were going to design, is we knew right away we're going to have to get somebody else on board. We needed a dedicated data wrangler. And then we focused our resources to align with our data and our evaluation program. So we really focused on safety assemblies, training, a lot of training exercises, and parent engagement is a big thing at the school district. We're evaluated on how many parents we engage. And so we draft action plans. Also, I think most everybody in the country calls them travel plans, right at parent organizational meetings. And then we have 4 classes that we offer through the University of Family Learning Program. So it's a university courses for families. And so that's how we focused our resources. And then we got more additional funding for walk audits and a program of our evaluation. So we don't have time to talk about this in this format, but I put a link here if you're interested, where you can go and look at our walk audit project and the evaluation project. So some of the other uses is funding. You can use data to get funding for Safe Routes to School programs and initiatives, and you can help your partners get funding for things that is really important to you. Crossing guards, infrastructure programs, that's not anything within our purview, but we don't care if we don't get the money for them as long as somebody's getting the money for them. So data can help them do that. And then, are you meeting the conditions of your funders? When you're gathering your data, is it matched to that grant that you got, or whatever conditions through your funding? And then, how are you doing? It's important to funders to know how you're doing, and not only to the current funders, but future funders too. So you can say, this is how we met the goal of this last grant that we had. So focusing resources on important elements is really an important use of your data. And how are you measuring effectiveness? Equity, and then do you need funding for additional data collection and analysis? So we contracted out a program and somebody to evaluate our program because we couldn't do it ourselves. And again, I have a link here that you can follow. The other thing is active transportation. We use a lot of our data to help guide master planning and a lot of documents in the cities and the county. We've had Safe Routes to School is almost in all the policy documents of all of the jurisdictions. And then we help cities get their bicycle-friendly city and county statuses. And then partners. Did I mention partners? Partners, again, we can support their funding efforts just by providing information, and they can alert us to funding opportunities. And I've had so many partners call us and say, hey, do you want to partner with us on this opportunity, whether it's for funding, for materials, or other things. And of course, you want to support your program goals and initiatives. So real quick, I have two other pieces here, and one is a sample from our bicycle pedestrian education report. It took us quite a bit of time, and I think we took a month or more listing all of our partners and all the things that we wanted to get out of a report. And so this is just a sample from the page that we can give to the state and say this is how many schools that we reached in, I think, the last half of 2015. And so this is just a real simple form, but it's really some really powerful numbers in here. You can see how many students we reached, how many schools we were out. And it's not just us, it's us and our partners that have done bicycle education, and I'll show you on the next page. For example, the City of Las Vegas Transportation Engineering Division, they help us with campaigns like Thank You for Driving Safely in the School Zone. Clark County School District Police help on Nevada Moves Day. They do bicycle helmet fittings. We're able to give this to them so that they can share their information. So not only do we get credit for it, but they get credit for it too, and that's part of being a really good partner. So just in conclusion, if you take stock today and take the time to get it right and ask those questions up front and really take the time to ask and think out the questions that you want to ask, it helps you perform your evaluation strategy and what data you need to collect to support it so much better. Inventory your partners, be really realistic about your capacity, and if you need help, ask for help or work towards getting funding for additional help. And again, partners, I just have to put that on everyone because that's important for us, but I think it's important for everyone. And then if you're not aligning your data collection with your evaluation and your program with your evaluation, it's a disconnect that can impact you because you have so limited time. It really helps you focus your resources. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Sherry. That was wonderful information and great insight. Now we're going to turn it over to Hannah.
Great. Can you see my screen?
You can. You're good to go.
Fantastic. All right. Thanks so much. And this is Hannah Capel with Alto Planning and Design. And I'm really going to build on Sherry's discussion of the independent evaluation and share a case study of a very large evaluation project where we were actually able to study some of the data that they were collecting in Nevada as well. So in 2011, the San Francisco Bay Area Metropolitan Transportation Commission, or MTC, commissioned an evaluation of the regional Safe Routes to School program. The study looked at Safe Routes to School program's potential to shift transportation modes for the school commute and to actually quantify the GHG emission reduction potential of Safe Routes to School interventions. So it also looked at factors that led to program success, and it was a really unique opportunity that, where we were able to consider how the administrative framework or how the program is structured, how that impacts the programming and success of a Safe Routes to School program. So at the time, this is back in 2011 to 2014, there were 15 independent Safe Routes to School programs in the Bay Area, which had different ways of implementing Safe Routes to School activities. And when MTC allocated funding in 2011, they distributed it to each of the 9 counties in the region, and that's what you can see across the top of this slide is the 9 counties. And the funding was to be used for Safe Routes to School non-infrastructure activities. And each county kind of used the funding in a different way, which made this a really interesting case study. There are 3 main ways that the counties used the funding. First, they directly hired a vendor, a consultant, or a bike coalition, or other local advocacy group to implement programs at schools and at the individual cities. Secondly, they allocated funding to the Department of Public Health or the Offices of Education to then run the program more directly through those avenues. Or third, they sub-allocated funding to the cities directly or to community partners and schools via small grants. So then there was, of course, substantial variation in the kind of depth and breadth of programming at the individual schools in each of the counties. And as you're probably all aware, the Bay Area is home to some of the oldest Safe Routes to School programs in the nation in Marin and Alameda counties. And then this funding enabled some other counties to begin the very first engagement around Safe Routes to School. So we really had a wide spectrum of how programs were being run and then tenure or length of involvement in the program. So ALTA provided technical assistance to each individual Safe Routes to School program. We provided forms, data entry analysis, and we produced reports by county, program, district, and school. And we modified the National Centers for Safe Routes to School Standard Parent Survey specifically for this analysis. And I wanted to quickly go through a couple of the things that we did because it enabled some of the analysis that we did that I'm going to talk about. So we made the survey instrument kind of branded for each Safe Routes to School program. We included logos and links and other specific language that each program used for their activities. We provided translations into multiple languages and then also offered the forms online in both English and translations. We used SurveyMonkey. And then we collected information for Two Children Perform, and this is kind of unique. We had found, mostly through word of mouth, that parents didn't want to do multiple surveys for multiple children. And so we allowed parents to complete the survey once for both kids and to capture the different information about those 2 children. And then, importantly, we asked the standard question, what's the approximate distance from your home to this child's school? But then we added a specific box so that they can say how far they lived if they lived more than 2 miles away. And this is important for us to be able to have some sense of the greenhouse gas emission impact. And then finally, we used a trip diary approach rather than the standard form that requires parents to select only one mode for how they get to and from school. And the screenshot of our survey shows how people were able to select a different mode or even multiple modes for each day of the week. And this really helps us capture a more modern or accurate view of how families make transportation choices and acknowledges the variation in transportation behaviors and opens it up to having more responses. So over the course of the 3 years from 2011 to 2014, we collected over 20,000 parent surveys and hand tally data that accounts for more than 1 million trips. And that's not just the data we included, that is just the data that we included in the analysis. We actually collected a lot more data, but then we couldn't include information from schools where we didn't have a pre and post data for the same school in the overall analysis. So we collected a lot of data at the beginning onset of the project, and then we had to not include a lot of that because we weren't getting the follow-up data at the exact same schools. And then beyond the parent surveys and the hand tallies, we collected demographic information, including the school enrollment and race and ethnicity of students, the students receiving free and reduced price lunches, as well as land uses and the street network density, where we used GIS. We also worked with each program to collect their activity tracking information. And this is something Sherry talked a lot about, but because there isn't a national standard for how people collect information about involvement, each program has their own way of tracking what's happening in each school and how long they've been involved in Safe Routes to School activities, and even what it even means to be part of a Safe Routes to School program. So we collected information from each county and each program and combined it as best we could. And we have some recommendations for collecting this kind of data, having looked at all of these different ways of doing it. So we recommend using Google Docs for continuous real-time tracking of activities. It makes it easier for paid staff and volunteers and site coordinators all to go in and update when an event has been held. And then keep it simple. Really think about what you're going to do with the data and what you really need to know. There's a lot of information you can collect. For example, for a walking school bus, you could collect the number of routes and number of students in each route, number of days they go, all this different information. And at the end, in order to do an analysis with the data, we needed to really simplify all of that information. And then share it with a lot of people. We experienced a lot of turnover, unsurprisingly, but even at the paid staff level. And the spreadsheets can be pretty easily lost, so we definitely recommend to share those spreadsheets with a lot of different partners and practitioners. Okay, so moving into what we found. For all of the post-period data, we found that almost 30% of students use active transportation and 55% use the family vehicle. I think it's pretty standard nationwide. It is an improvement from the pre-program period, or the pre-funding period, I should say. We were able to show statistically significant increases of walk-in biking with the accompanying reduction in family vehicle use. And 2% reduction in family vehicle use may seem relatively small, but it has pretty significant impact once you dive into the data further. So we were able to cross-tabulate the mode share results by the distance that families live from school, and we saw even higher shifts to active modes for groups at the quarter-mile to 1-mile sweet spot. So really the people who live within the distance of school where they could be walking and biking but hadn't been, that's where we saw the success of our interventions. And then using the parent-reported trip distances and mode shifts, we were able to estimate the distances students traveled on an annual basis. And I should mention the reports are available through MTC on their website and details all the assumptions and data analysis and methodology that we used for this study. So the distances by mode that we collected that I talked about enabled us to estimate the greenhouse gas emissions impact, looking both at starting and running emissions. And it's important to note that because school trips are so short in general, the starting emissions have a relatively high impact on overall greenhouse gases for school trips. And in my experience, most Safe Routes to School programs and funders acknowledge that sort of shifting the dial and showing an increase in the share of students who are walking and biking is sufficient to conclude that the program is successful and is having GHG reduction impacts. Even with the resources we had for this study, we had to make a lot of assumptions to really get into the numbers about the vehicle miles traveled and greenhouse gas results. It's also important to note that we think that Safe Routes to School programs tend to be relatively higher cost for the greenhouse gas impact if you're comparing them to other programs that make it more expensive and less convenient for people to drive and park. Being honest, increasing the price of gas or making it really hard to park are the most successful interventions if you're looking out to really make a shift in greenhouse gas emissions. But Safe Routes to School also has a lot of benefits around establishing and promoting patterns of behavior that lead to lifelong changes, and they also address safety and equity needs that are really vital to programs. So it's important to acknowledge these as you're setting up your program evaluation. It's really important to go back to your overall program goals when you're evaluating and identify the performance measures beyond the standard mode split and emissions. So this slide shows some of the examples. It's certainly not comprehensive, but it gets at some of the ideas of looking at greenhouse gas reduction. Of course, we want to look at the mode shift to active transportation, but you also want to look at the mode shift to shared transportation, to busing and carpooling, things like that. And that is actually going to have a higher impact on the greenhouse gases. It's also the trip length. And we know that the trip length is really impacted by policies and where the schools are sited and whether students are invited to go to their neighborhood schools. So those are all factors that are outside of the realm of our Safe Routes programs mostly to impact. So we also need to look at the safety impacts of our programs, of the crash reductions near schools, and reduction in crash rates near schools, but also how students are learning to walk and bike more safely. And then many Safe Routes to School programs these days are really explicitly focused on equity issues and looking to distribute resources to disadvantaged communities and include all populations in the programming. And so really looking at how the resources are serving underserved schools, how the funding is going to underserved schools, and how different activities are targeted towards the schools, and even looking at racial bias in our communications, things like that. Those are all evaluation metrics to consider equity. And then to understand how the structure of the Safe Routes to School program impacts the progress towards the performance measures, we also looked at the depth and the breadth of each county's program. So this slide shows what proportion of the county's schools are formally involved in the Safe Routes to School program. And of course, the counties are very different in sizes. Marin has the largest share of schools involved, but they only have 70 schools in their county compared to 375 schools in Alameda and 404 in Santa Clara. And it's important to note here, again, that each county defined participating schools for themselves. So schools may have activities or resources that aren't captured based on how it's defined by each county. And then on the flip side, we wanted to understand the depth of the program at each school, or how involved each school was in Safe Routes to School activities. So you'll see here that the counties, some counties aren't included because they didn't actually track the activities that were going on in each of the schools. It's important to point out here that we made a lot of decisions about what constituted an activity. We combined recurring activities into one instance since we were relying on the data that each county collected individually. And this chart really shows that San Francisco has deep engagement. They have almost 6 activities per school per year, but they were only involved in 17 schools out of 123 total. And then by contrast, Marin had a great reach, but each school participated in fewer activities per year. So we really were able to see the tension between the depth and the breadth of the programming available. One of the most interesting findings that we saw is a significant increase in active modes during the first 2 years of being officially in the program, and then more moderate increases thereafter. And I think part of this is that the low-hanging fruit, the families who are easily able to shift their trips early do so, and then the remainder can be harder to change. And then also part of it is it gets harder to show percent increases as more students are already participating, of course. And then finally, we cross-tabulated the school involvement in different activities with their mode shift and their mode split. And we found a clear connection between activities that directly encourage families to walk and bike and increasing active transportation, including frequent walk and roller programs, walking school buses, and bike trains. Interestingly, we actually didn't see any correlation between land uses or the street connectivity or a lot of those other demographic factors and their mode shift or mode split. It was really focused on the activities that directly impact students walking and biking to school. So when we concluded this analysis in 2014, we shared the information with the individual counties who are implementing the Safe Routes to School activities and all the practitioners in the region. We're hoping that this encourages them to pursue data-driven approaches to their programs. It would be great to see this kind of rigorous evaluation framework continued and really focus on all of the different performance measures that are aligned with the program's goals to figure out better ways of evaluating sustainability metrics as well, and in order to promote programs that are going to be successful and more lasting into the future. So thank you for your attention, and that was my slide.
Thank you, Hannah. And we'll switch it over to Seth. And I'd also like to remind everybody to enter your questions into the question box, and we'll try to get through as many as we can at the end of the webinar. Take it away, Seth.
Thank you, Michelle. And hello, everybody. I said this earlier kind of in practice with the group here. It's going to be hard to follow Sherry and Hannah, who just really laid out a great foundation upon which to talk about evaluation, partnerships, how to collect data, the considerations about that, how to look at the depth and breadth of programming. It's all wonderful stuff. What I want to talk about today is slightly different, and it's on a bit of a larger scale. It's on the statewide level in North Carolina. What we're really focused on right now is looking at not only performance measures that we can track and monitor over time, but also how that relates to what we do with our programming or performance management. So I'm going to talk about that, what we're doing in North Carolina. One of the projects we work with the North Carolina Department of Transportation on is called Active Routes to School. As you kind of see here in the schematic, it's a partnership between the DOT and the Division of Public Health. Basically, Ed Johnson, the coordinator in North Carolina, also the acting director of the Division of Bicycle and Pedestrian Transportation at the DOT, he reached out to folks within the Public Health Division and said, I understand that you have people in county health departments that are doing community transformation grants and other programming with communities. Is there any way that we can start talking about safe, accessible transportation in the realm of public health? Let's get together and talk about that. And as part of that, we'll talk about it in the realm of Active Routes to School, which is in essence the kind of non-infrastructure side of Safe Routes to School programming. And the ultimate goal, which should be familiar to many of you, of this project is to increase the number of elementary and middle school children and students who safely walk and bike to school. So that's the ultimate goal, and then we're going to talk about how we're measuring progress toward that goal and also altering our program accordingly to what we're finding with results. So the way this is structured is that funding goes out to each of these, the stars that you see there, the lead county health departments. And there is someone called an Active Routes to School regional coordinator housed within that county health department who does Safe Routes to School programming with schools in their region. There are exactly 100 counties across North Carolina, and the regions average about 10. There's 10 regions, and an average of 10. Some have a little more, some have a little less. But they go out and they do these activities that relate to things that are, again, probably very familiar. What we wanted to really focus on here in this project in coordination with the DOT and the Division of Public Health was to focus on those things we know tend to relate to better outcomes. So these awareness raising events, I'm going to use quotes around that, those relate to walk and bike to school days. These are getting the foot in the door, right? Having schools experiment with walking and biking to school. And then as Hannah pointed out, really ramping it up to talk about more ongoing programs, talking about walking school buses, bike trains, walking Wednesdays, etc. Talking about, especially given the context we're working in North Carolina, a lot of it relates to educating and training students about safe pedestrian and bicycle skills that they can carry with them all their lives. And then also looking at kind of levels of policy change at the school and school district level about how they approach school transportation and talk about it and the sorts of regulations and rules they have about walking and cycling. And then also working with community partners to look at the built environment. So being kind of the ears on the ground about where environmental changes can most benefit communities. They're out there doing that work as well. So just quickly, I want to talk about, sort of the difference between performance measurement and some examples of that, and then go into performance management. We'll have some examples of how that works here in North Carolina. Performance management, or measurement rather, is really the collection of data to see if the agreed upon actions you talked about, like Sherry had discussed, the agreed upon activities we're going to be doing, are they achieving the desired results? So this is how we frame it as part of the evaluation of this Active Routes to School project. We see processes, these tend to be things like meetings with MPO staff and others in the communities that then relate to the activities, the outputs as we call them, that then of course relate to the things we're measuring, which is walking and biking safely to school, and how those kind of feed back to the different processes and outputs as well. So performance management, and again I'll provide some examples of that, but basically relates to looking at the measurement results and trying to make decisions based upon those. What direction should we head in next, sort of questions. Is this working? Is this not working? Should we change up strategy? Those sort of things. An example of a measure that we're tracking, easy enough, something you can do as well if you go visit this site, walkbiketoschool.org. And by the way, Bike to School Day is coming up, so if your schools are involved in that, please do go to this site and make sure your school is counted. This is something we're tracking in North Carolina. One of the things we looked at is over time, in relation to the implementation of the Active Routes to School project, when we looked at before the Active Routes to School project, we saw that on average, 5-year average, about 85 schools every year would do Walk to School Day. And they tended to be, as you can see here, they tended to be focused more in the Charlotte, Mecklenburg area, and then in the Research Triangle area, sort of in the middle of the state there, and scattered throughout other parts of the state. As we get into the project, we see that this ramps up quite precipitously. 2014, this is when the Active Routes to School project begins. 2015, now we start seeing more rural areas, more mountainous regions engaging, more coastal. And then 2016, the latest data we have, 317 schools. That's a significant increase, certainly than what we had seen before Active Routes to School. So this is an indicator that Active Routes to School project coordinators are going out and really engaging a lot of schools. And for a lot of these schools, it's the first time they've ever done anything like Safe Routes to School. Another way to look at it is to see the kind of trends that we're seeing. So from before Active Routes to now, we're estimating this upcoming October, we're going to be getting to about 392 events. And then Bike to School Day, we're seeing similar increases there. And we estimate that we'll have about 230 schools involved with that this year at the end of May. So how does that relate to management? From this, we heard from the coordinators out there that one of the things we also do is provide technical assistance to these coordinators, is that they wondered, okay, well, we've done a couple Walk to School or Bike to School Day events. How do we get from these events to more ongoing? That's probably a perennial question, right? How do you get beyond Walk to School Day? So we developed a resource based upon what we've learned nationally about excellent programs, many of which Hannah and Sherry talked about. And then also some of the literature about, really nudging people to take the more sustained behavior change. So these are just a list of some recommendations. There's a resource we developed for them and shared with them so that they can engage communities, even talking about how they speak about things, talking about programs instead of events. Programs are more consistent and ongoing. And even the way they talk about healthy and safe. For a lot of people, those are sort of abstract concepts, but really trying to show, sort of like storytelling, right? Show, don't tell kind of thing. Showing happy kids and smiling parents when at events and things like that. Another measure we have is what we like to call active travel readiness. We understand in North Carolina we have a lot of schools that are very rural, that are in very mountainous regions, and for a number of reasons it's really difficult for children to walk to and from school. We wanted some other measure to look at this. So what we had done is look through the literature, looking at sort of school climate on active travel to school and readiness measures in other fields, and we came up with a sort of two-dimensional I guess, measure of this, and talking about active travel readiness. It goes from resisting the idea of safe routes to school, active routes, all the way to maintaining their efforts. So there's lots of interest in the school. They're doing lots of different things to promote walking and cycling, and they're looking to do more. They want to achieve more. That's kind of the highest level we have right now. So an example of what this looks like right now over time, since sort of the early part of the project to very recently in January, we see that the maintainer status, at some point in 2015, a lot of the schools on average got to this sort of maintainer status. There is a lot of interest and they're doing a few things every year. And then it sort of flatlines there. Is that maybe a natural ceiling? We don't know. But again, using this as a measure to get into management, providing recommendations then. So one of the things we learned from the coordinators is that a lot of the ways that they were getting schools motivated to engage in active routes to school is that they're providing them with incentives. Well, we thought about this, and we again looked through experience and literature and saying, all right, what do we know about really solid use of incentives? Well, we found that really introducing safe walking and biking to families in communities could be a great way to introduce it. Say, hey, this is something that's really cool and fun, and let's do this together. And then prompting later on, instead of just doing it willy-nilly, maybe intermittently throughout the year, really trying to be thoughtful about when incentives are used. Pairing it with goal setting. So goals come from inside the person, incentives come from outside, right? So it's pairing it and making it more internalized. So if students have goals to walk a certain number of miles or bike a certain number of miles, that's sort of an example there. Building habits for families. A lot of times this happens in cases where families are new to a school. They just moved, they haven't set up their school commuting habits yet. It's a prime time to introduce walking and cycling to them. And then even the incentives themselves, starting to look at those. Which ones make it easier? Of course, obvious ones are bicycles, bike helmets, walking maps, things of that nature, make it easier. And then lastly, just looking at how kids and anybody are internally motivated to do anything, and in particular walking and bike. So, how do we provide students with choice about how they get to and from school? How do we create opportunities for them to connect with others while they're doing this, and then to be competent or to develop these pedestrian bicycle safety skills? Another way we looked is at the parent survey. One of the things we did is add a few questions about kind of family level walking and biking activity. So how much the parents walk and bike and how much the students walk and bike outside of the school commute, on after school, on weekends, things like that. From this we found that, of course, distance beyond, at least in North Carolina, beyond 1 mile of school, very unlikely to walk or bike to the school. But another thing we found were two things. Both parents who thought that walking and biking was fun for their child, they were 3 times more likely to walk or bike than parents who did not think that. And then those students who asked for permission of their parents to walk and bike, 2.5 times more likely to do those things. So what does that relate to? Again, this this relates to the sort of feedback we give to the coordinators and the project manager to say, well, let's highlight the fun of walking and biking then. Let's encourage parents to walk and bike more, because it seems like there's a relationship between the way students get to school and their parents. Discussing transportation. And then talking about kind of a welcoming climate and really engaging these traditionally disadvantaged communities, which in North Carolina have some unique elements to them about being rural and mountainous a lot of times. How do we engage these communities, and so that they just write off Safe Routes to School as something that's just not for them? How do we engage them? So when we look at the results from how kids get to school and how much their parents walk and bike, if kids are walking and biking to school, their parents are much more likely to be walking and biking more generally. There's a relationship there. And when you look at the bottom there at the CDC recommendation, at least the sample that we were looking at, they're getting the recommendation for physical activity every week. And then also kids. So not only walking and biking to school, but that also predicted their walking and biking elsewhere, to the library, to the park, on the weekends, just generally. They were getting roughly half of what they needed at the time that we surveyed them, just based on walking and biking. They may have gotten physical activity in other ways. But as you see there, and as you see, there's sort of at the family vehicle, there's quite a few minutes acquired from those students. The family vehicle and the carpool, that seems to be related more to the income of the school. So those students who attended schools of higher income tended to take these modes and also get a little more physical activity than less wealthy students. So what's next for us in the performance management realm? We have sort of two broad initiatives. Right now we're conducting what we call a health equity assessment. In essence, what this is a positive deviance study for these schools that are both lower income and low academic achieving schools, how they achieve remarkable results. We're seeing some schools that are really, really low income, and how they're transcending all the issues associated with that to do tremendous things with walking and cycling to school. We want to understand why, and relative to their peers, why they stand out, what makes them exceptional. And then we really want to examine sort of this link. So we saw this association between how kids get into school and how much their parents walk and bike. We really understand the direction of that relationship. Is it students impacting parents, parents impacting students? What's the strength and relationship of those, direction of those relationships? So with that, I thank you, and I will hand it back over to Michelle to open it up for, I guess, general questions.
Thanks, Seth. Thank you, everybody. And let me back over here. We have a few questions, and we have time to answer, I think, almost everything that's come in. I wanted to start by letting everybody know that this webinar is being recorded. It will be available on our website within a couple days under the resources tab under webinars, and also a PDF of all of the presentations will be up there as well. There was a couple questions about getting specific resources or examples from the various presentations. So hopefully those slides will help, and I think all of our speakers are happy to have anybody follow up directly with them about specific forms or examples. So first question is I have a couple of them for Hannah. Question about calculating the greenhouse gas emissions and the reduction. I won't ask you to, off the top of your head, quote the equation, but if you could point us to the direction of where that is and maybe talk a little bit generally about how that's done.
Yeah, so we really tried to acknowledge we were very tied to using the categories of how far students live from school. So we basically took the midpoint of each category. So, the quarter mile or less, we used the midpoint of that distance and assumed that all the trips were that length. And we extrapolated all of the results that we got from the surveys across all of the entire population of the school and assumed that everybody was doing the same split that we got from the data. And so we were able to kind of do the calculations individually for each bucket of students, if you will, and then add it all up together. So there's a lot of more detail in our reports, which are either they're on the MTC website, I believe, or I think my contact information is available on the webinar. And I'm happy to send the details of it or discuss it further with anyone.
Great. Thanks, Hannah. If you provide us with the link, we can link the report as well when we put up the slide. So we think that'll be helpful for folks.
Perfect.
Another question for you, Hannah. What were the sources of data for looking at crashes and crash reduction, and how is that data used in informing the program?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In California, we have it relatively easy because the statewide integrated traffic, I forgot the rest of it, TWITRS, is a database that the state maintains and provides, and it's really easy to download that data and use it. For the purpose of this study, I think we just looked at collisions involving bicycle pedestrians, and we didn't go into the detail of the time of day or whether it involved a youth-aged person, but that is definitely an analysis that I've seen used when you get down to the school level and are starting to really understand the needs and the barriers for that specific school.
Great, thank you. Let's see, so we have a couple questions for Seth. Seth, how did the team measure walking and biking outside of the program?
Great question. We had used, sort of adapted the International Physical Activity Questionnaire. It's the short form of that. I believe you can find that online. It should be open, available to the public. But basically what that asks is questions about moderate to vigorous physical activity for at least 10 minutes at a time over the last week. So it's a kind of stepwise process of getting people to kind of come up with a pretty accurate measure of the number of minutes over the past week they had engaged in physical activity. But this, we asked, of course, about walking and cycling. And for students, we asked after school and on the weekend, and for parents, we just said at any point, as well as on the trip to and from school. So we were able to discern what proportion of their walking and biking activity was attributable to getting to and from school and what happened outside of that realm.
Great, thank you. Two sort of related questions, and I think I'll open it up for any of the speakers to chime in. The first, are there agreed upon best practices for conducting student and arrival departure tallies? For example, doing all the classrooms versus some of the classrooms versus focusing on certain grade levels? And then kind of a follow-up question of that, do you have strategies and tips to get individual schools and program providers to participate in data collection, like doing the tallies?
Who wants to take a stab at that?
I can say for our study, we talked to Seth, who I think is actually the expert nationally in how to do these studies, but we actually decided to focus on at least 2 classrooms per grade per school, and that because we were trying to reach so many schools for the hand tallies, that was a good way of capturing that data and not trying to get too much information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great example.
I would like to answer regarding getting the schools to participate. I think that's back to finding out your school partner. You need to know what their goals are and some of the things that they're mandated to do. And a lot of times with data collection, if you can incorporate it into their goals, it actually will do a 2-for-1. So I point out to my schools all the time, if this meets their wellness policy and it meets their goal to keep kids safe and happy at school. And so if they can participate in this data collection part of it, it actually meets goals in other areas and it makes them more excited to help.
I would agree with both Hannah and Sherry on both counts. It really is related to the relationship with the school. It's certainly what we found out. Oftentimes, it's the forgotten E evaluation, but if they can see it as part of a broader program and how it's going to help them do their program better, that often helps. And I know that some places will use results from the data collection to go back to the school and make further, to engage them again and then plan the next step. Oftentimes that's a nice approach. Just real quickly about the organization of that, places we've seen that work the best is when it's highly organized. Meaning if you're working on like a local level like Sherry or a regional level like Hannah, having people collecting the data inside the schools or whoever is doing the data collection do it in coordination with one another, time it such that it happens around the same time and that everyone's on board, that it be set up ahead of time and then you know, implemented.
Great, thank you. That's good insight. I think that's all the time we have today for the Q&A, and I want to thank the speakers again. If you have questions that weren't answered, please feel free to follow up individually with them. We'll also be sending out a link to a survey. We'd love to get your feedback on this webinar and help us inform our future webinars. And thank you again for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.